All right. Good morning, everyone. Sorry I was a bit late. As Danny messaged in WhatsApp, it was the tour down under, like 5 minutes became 15 minutes just to travel 1 kilometer. Yeah, but what can we do? So, this morning I wanted to talk about this topic. And before I start, just to ask this question: what is the biggest event to affect the world last 50 years? Now, you don't have to tell me, but I'm sure some of you will have an idea of where I'm going, but I'll tell you the answer. And that answer is COVID. COVID. And it's quite clear that this was a very big event. And the reason I'm talking about this is because recently when I was on holiday in Japan, I had COVID for the first time. So I managed to escape it all these years, but I got COVID in the end. And all right, I'll go closer because I was a bit loud. And I thought it's important not to forget what has happened, but to learn from it, because there is a lot of lessons you can learn from what happened during COVID that applies to Christianity, to the church, to everyone. And I don't think, and I know everybody wants to forget about it, like in the sense that nobody talks about it anymore because it's like over. And so you move on, and you forget the past, and you don't want to think about it anymore. But I think it's important to look at it because it was such a strange event in many ways that we can learn a lot from. All right, so we'll start with some pictures. I dug into my library, and this was the last Christmas, like the end of year event that we had. This was in 2019. And you can see all the kids were very little back then, because that was a whole, actually, it's actually 4 years and a bit ago, all right? And so this was at the end of year gathering, and then there was nothing, right? We have never had one again since, okay? We kind of had, we didn't have the same kind of event recently. And that was my last holiday. That was, as you can see, that was like in January of 2020. This was in Disney Sea, actually. So you can see that, okay, look, it's corner, and it's clearly not the case anymore. All right. So if we go back in history, you can read there. I got a lot of this from Wikipedia, just to, and it's quite interesting to just look at it and see the timeline, what actually happened. So it was in 2019 that someone got sick in Wuhan, right? And then by 2020, by January the 23rd, so I actually got back to Australia in like on the 15th or 16th of January. So I kind of got in just before all of this happened. And the first case was on the 19th of January from a Chinese citizen in Melbourne. And then 3 other people in Sydney from Wuhan. And that was the start of it. By the 1st of February, so like 1 week after, Australia had banned all people coming from China. All right. And everyone from China is self-quarantine. And within 6 weeks after that, they closed the borders. Okay, so on the 20th of March, Australia became an island. It was always an island, but it became a true island, and nobody could come in or out. And 4 days later, we became individual states. So South Australia closed the borders, and nobody could come in or out. And that was the start of that. And we didn't know at that time how things would end up. So together with the closure of the states, there were all these rules, right? So all registered licensed clubs, premises, hotels, bars, entertainment venues, places of worship, cinemas, casinos, cafes. I mean, everything was closed. And you could only get takeaway food. You had the 4-meter rule. And that started on the 23rd of March. In South Australia, yes, there was also the additional thing, you could only have 10 people. All right, and it was the 1 person per 4 square meters. And as we'll see, actually, a lot of this stuff is all made up. Anyway, we'll go into that in a second. So it's quite interesting. And obviously in South Australia, they did very well initially. We had nothing. We had no COVID in state. So there was some variable loosening of the rules and tinkering with it. And then on the 18th of November, so that was like 8 months after. So we were doing fine in between. There was an outbreak. You guys remember what happened there? On the 21st of November, there was this lockdown because there was COVID found in the Woodville Pizza Bar. And the restrictions got tighter again. And then it got kind of eased after that. And so we struggled on for a year. And then by March the 5th, 2021, so it's actually only a year, and they actually developed the vaccine already. So the first dose was given to a South Australian doctor at Murray Bridge Hospital. Actually worked there on Friday, but there you go. And then you remember the Adelaide Showgrounds just across the street was where they had the mass vaccination campaign. So I went there a few times. I'm sure everybody here did the same. Yes, and there were all those testing queues at the Morpheville race course. I remember lining up. So yes, and then you thought that it was over, but it wasn't quite over, because in June of that year, they were still working to ramp up the vaccine. They reintroduced restrictions for winter, and there was like you couldn't sing, no buffets. There was like further restrictions, and then there was another lockdown in July because of 5 cases of the Delta variant. You remember we were talking about the Delta, and then there was the Omicron and all the various variants back then. And then by November, so it was a full like 20 months after it started, we managed to get to 80% vaccine coverage, and they kind of opened the borders. And if you remember back to that time, there was a lot of concern and outcry when they were trying to do that, because the numbers started going up. And it was funny that they always said that they were trying to suppress the virus, but they kind of changed history and said that they were changing from elimination suppression, when actually Morrison always said it was on the suppression strategy, but actually they were not. So there was a lot of controversy, and then they had more caps. So like they kept going to and fro. So they wanted to reduce the restriction. When cases go up, and they panic, and so they introduced restrictions again. That happened off and on from November to December in 2021. Until finally in early 2022, they actually just bit the bullet. I think Western Australia was the last one to join the rest of Australia. And then finally, it was September 2022 when they said don't bother isolating even if you had COVID. So it was only recently, about a year ago now, and then international travels kind of come back in the last year. So it's quite hard to believe that we lived through that, actually. And that's a picture of the first men's fellowship after COVID was over. That was at John Sisson's place, and that was a good time for all. So what lessons have we learned from this whole episode, this whole experiment or experience? In many ways, it was an experiment. The 3 things I think that I want to bring up. One is truth versus falsehood. Second is leadership and decision making. And the third one is about uncertainty of life. So truth versus falsehood. Now this is actually a big topic in the world today, because they keep talking about misinformation, disinformation, truth, facts, falsehood, and people use different implications for each of these things. And it was extremely difficult during the pandemic to work out fact from fiction. Nobody actually knew what was going on. And there were so many different rules. They kept changing the rules, kept changing the restrictions. And I remember they used to have daily briefings on how many cases were found today, how many cases, what we're supposed to do because of that. And there was so much censorship. Anyone who said we need to, learn to live with it was considered evil or mean-spirited, selfish or cruel. It was just crazy. I remember there are all these viral things about they call them Karens who are like not wearing masks. I think it's quite close to Karen who's on the other side, but they used to. You guys remember that, right? It was just shocking. And I remember that pizza bar was burnt or target of arson just because it had some cases of COVID in there. It was, I think there was this removalist as well from Sydney who spread COVID, but and he was pilloried, and it was just the worst impulses of people coming up because of fear and the massive fear mongering. It's just so hard to work out truth from falsehood. And recently they interviewed Dr. Fauci, who was one of the leading CDC directors in the US, and the 6 feet social distancing thing was actually just made up, and he acknowledged that it's actually just made up. It's arbitrary. So under oath, he said there's no evidence that it worked. Like whether you have 4 square meter rule and stuff, there was never ever any evidence that would prevent infection. They just guessed that it would work. All right, so they just tried it out. It was just an experiment on the whole population, really. I mean, even the vaccine effectiveness, I think the vaccines were a great miracle in the sense that God's providence that we had the vaccine so quickly, but they oversold the thing. As in, they said everyone has to get the vaccine to reduce transmission, right? They say that if you didn't get the vaccine, you could be killing your grandparents because you could spread it to them and the vaccine would stop you from spreading it. When actually all the vaccine did is it protects the individual from serious infection and death. And I guess the reason they did that, and they made it mandatory as well, and the reason they did that is because they were trying to save lives, okay? But I'll discuss that question further in a minute, okay? Because it's actually an important question, and it applies actually to Christianity as well. And that question, which I'll talk further, is how far are you allowed to go to save someone's life? And that's something to think about. Because as Christians, we know that Christianity saves lives, right? We save spiritual lives. How far are you supposed to go to save a person's life? All right, now we talk about lockdowns. The stats are mixed. You'll never know whether the lockdowns work or not. But we do know that it does reduce mortality in the first wave by about 3%. And obviously in Italy, where it hit quite badly at the start, it was pretty devastating at the start because people had no idea what to do. So they got overwhelmed and it was just a disaster. So, to be fair, when you don't know what to do, lockdowns are a pretty good idea. But once you know what to do, the question is whether you keep going with that is more debatable. All right, now when we talk about spiritual truths, just like scientific errors and misinformation, spiritual truths can be misrepresented. And that's why in this church, in this congregation, we try so hard to get everyone to find the truth and learn it and apply it to their own lives. Because it is actually quite difficult, because nobody's perfect, I think. I'm sure, actually, I don't think, I'm sure. Nobody is perfect. And all of us do not know everything. And I think that applies to, to every field and everything, actually. And only God knows the answers. And our job is really there are things we are certain about, okay? And there are things that you can know and you can be sure of. But then there's a whole bunch of other things that you're uncertain of and you're not sure. what happened in the pandemic is that things that people weren't sure of, they pretended to be sure of. And that was the real issue, that they didn't know, but they couldn't show that they didn't know because people wanted certainty or wanted direction. Whereas in Christianity, the same actually applies. We don't know everything, but we know enough to know that God is there and He will save us. That is what we know. The other fine details like whether how you do certain things, we don't know, or we don't always know. Like like when you take the Lord's Supper, whether you should wait for everyone before you take it, or whether you take it as you get it. Whether you have one cup or many cups. Those things you can remain uncertain. Okay, because that's not necessary to be certain of. So in 2 Timothy 2:15, it tells us, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. And that's our duty as Christians. And so we handle the word of truth correctly, and we handle facts and falsehood correctly as well. It's important to remember also, in 2 Timothy 3:15 and 17, that we should remember that God's scriptures make us wise, all right, for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. And all scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. And ultimately, how do you separate truth from falsehood is the evidence of time. Like they say, truth always stands eternal. And it's true. Like, truth is reality, basically. And what has happened after bears witness to whether what happened before, what we believe is true or false. And that's one of the reasons why I believe Christianity is true. Because what the Bible teaches are good principles, and principles that have stood the test of time. Now, the next topic, leadership and decision making, it's kind of linked to the first one. We live in a time where people don't tolerate differences of opinion as much as before. I think it comes in cycles, but anyway, it is a lot harder to discuss and debate topics, especially over COVID or subsequently even. And I think this parallels the changing social and spiritual climate, because people want to kind of take control of the situation. Like during COVID, it was never fashionable to question whether whether the vaccines should be mandatory or not. Everyone agreed that you should get vaccinated to protect yourself, but whether you should make it compulsory to keep your job. There were a lot of cases where people had bad reactions to the vaccine, and I had a story. One of my colleagues who's a doctor, he had a bad response to the first dose, but to keep his job, he had to take the second and third job. So he didn't do too well after that. But so those kind of things, there was no room for negotiation or debate, and that's happened in Christianity. When people ban people for expressing views. Even recently, the tennis, Australia Open, the Margaret Court, for example, she's like a pastor in West Australia, and although she won a whole heap of Grand Slams because she's against homosexuality, they banned her and want to rename the court instead of Margaret Court Arena to something else. So it's that kind of ideology that if you don't agree with us, you must be wrong, you must be speaking falsehood. And that's quite a bad way to go, I think. Even in the church, if we disagree with one another, there should always be room to discuss things and work it out from the scripture. So the other thing is expertise and authority. Now, what is an expert? An expert is basically the dictionary definition is someone having a great deal of knowledge or skill in a particular area. So like Stephen, who's not here, is an expert. Tyler, he's a tiler, right? So he's an expert at tiling and flooring. And I'm supposed to be an expert in radiology. So we are experts in that field. But when it comes to a new thing, can there ever be a true expert? Like when it came to coronavirus, right? Nobody had dealt with such a thing before. No one even knows what is going on here. And somehow there are some magic experts who pop up. And that's, to me, that is incredible because actually nobody knew what was going on. Not the experts, there were no experts actually, and it was all made up in effect, really. So until you've done it a few times, you can't be an expert, basically. So if you've never done a lockdown before, how can you be an expert in lockdowns? Because you've never done it before. And so it was quite disturbing to see people take up authority as an expert when there could be no experts possible in such an area. And when it comes to leadership, the Bible has always said, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. And it's because being a leader actually is difficult. So I'm not going to criticize all the decisions made during COVID because, as I said, there were no experts because people actually didn't know what was going on. And the people probably just wanted some direction. But the real question is the right direction more control or less control? So, and that is actually a big philosophical question. Is the right answer when you don't know what's going on to let people make up their own minds, or to force your uncertainty into certainty and controlling them to do what you want? And that's actually a big question. Leadership is difficult, and our society is very critical. The leaders up here are always targeted for whatever reason, for no reason sometimes, just because they're leaders. And that's happened everywhere. Okay, even in the church, I think, as much as in society in general. And it is so hard because we are also scared of making mistakes. I remember the hardest thing about my job, I teach the registrars, is to be able to live with being not always correct, to be able to live with making mistakes. Because for radiologists, like let's say you miss this cancer in the corner there, and that happens to all of us, because sometimes you just miss it. And to be able to live with that is difficult. You pick up 90 of those cancers, but you miss a couple of them. And you always remember that way more than all the 90 you picked up. Same as Christianity. All the people you've helped along the years, you don't remember, but the people you failed or you didn't do enough, you tend to remember. So the question I asked, actually, I don't really have the answers for this, but I want us to think about it. Is physical death the worst outcome someone can experience? With COVID, that seems to be the answer, right? You don't want to die, or you don't want people to die. And are we responsible for others' health if we transmit infectious disease? And that was the question. In Singapore, they said if you were not vaccinated and you got COVID, they wouldn't pay for your healthcare. And I thought, man, that is so wrong on so many levels. And you should think about how far should we go to prevent death? If I could prevent you from dying by locking you in a room so you don't get any infection and so you don't get any accidents, is that a good thing? Is that something you would accept? And how far do we trust others to make correct judgments and decisions affecting your own life? So if you ask a spiritual question, how far do we go to prevent someone from hell? And this was a question that's the church has struggled with over the centuries. Like in the Inquisition, they wanted to force people to repent and become believers, so you burn them at the stake. It's kind of a twisted. If you take it too far, we should compulsorily make everybody Christians. If you really believe that Christianity saves you, why should you not do that? And why didn't God force everyone to believe? See, these are and that is the question that people should ask themselves. what do you think? How far do you think we should go, and how much blame should people put on others for things outside their control? All right, so I'll just go quickly. Just ask the question, do we fear spiritual death? I don't think we fear it as much as physical death. I appreciate Sam's thoughts on that he's ready to go because he's confident that he's got spiritual life. That's a big question. Mark 16, 15, 16 says, whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. I think the real question is, do we trust people to make good decisions? And obviously the government didn't trust the people to make good decisions during COVID. They thought everyone's selfish. If we didn't lock everybody down, we'll all run out and kill each other. And that was the overall thinking at that time. The final point I want to make, I don't have much time, I'm over time, is uncertainty of life. In James 4, it tells us, what is our life? It is a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. COVID hit us like a storm or like a tsunami. We were all swept away. I hope we never see such another situation. And there was this huge rise in mental illness, despair, depression. People were suffering with job losses. It was just a terrible event. So how do we vaccinate ourselves from such a situation? How do we immunize ourselves from such a situation? I'll give you 3 key attributes that we should develop. First one is patience. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. And as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard the steadfastness of Job. You have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. So we need to cultivate patience. I think those who went through COVID were all patient because it was a terrible situation. The next attitude is to have thanksgiving or gratitude. No matter the circumstance, even when we were locked in our homes and couldn't go out to even walk around outside, there was a patch. So we couldn't even go to the park to exercise, right? Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I'll say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but everything by prayer and supplication, thanksgiving. Let your request be made known to God, and peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guide your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So have the right attitude of thanksgiving. And finally, contentment. Philippians 4:11. Not that I speak of being in need, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I think that's a critical passage for all Christians, to have patience, to have gratitude, and to have contentment. So in conclusion, sorry, I got this post-COVID talk. So in conclusion, I think the COVID, taught the church some hard lessons. I haven't gone through all the issues. We now know Zoom is not as good as meeting in person. I think that's important to recognize. I think all the studies, they did do studies actually for work. And if you just do Zoom versus in person, you have a 30% less chance of getting promoted. And I think you've got like a 50-60% less mentorship from other people, because a lot of people, like a lot of life, is about interacting with other people in real life, not just through a screen. So that's why it's always encouraged to come back in person. Zoom is all right it's better than nothing. But yeah, how much, it's quite far away still from meeting in person. It's not good for man to be alone. I think that's very true. A lot of loneliness during COVID. I think that was the worst thing, right? We had to die alone in hospitals. I think that was just terrible. I don't think, look, in the end, I thought it's best to give people the option. If you want to take the risk of catching COVID, it should be on you you can still go. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I thought it was way too heavy-handed. Like, why do you have to do so much compulsory stuff? All right, and the last one is fear is very powerful. I know people who are still afraid of COVID even now. And there is still a lot of fear about infection, about risk, about life and death. And so those are those hard lessons. But ultimately, I just want to bring it back to the original passage. Just remember this for the Christian. We know that all things work together for good for them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. And we are all called according to His purpose. So thank you. I apologize, I'm way over. So thank you.